It had been years since I'd let anyone pass the threshold of my quiet little home tucked along the coast of Oregon. Not because I didn't want the company, but because I'd simply forgotten how to welcome it. My name is Evelyn and I'm 67 years old. I've lived alone since my husband, Richard, passed nearly 8 years ago. He died of a sudden heart attack on a rainy Tuesday, and the house hasn't echoed with laughter since. The garden we planted together has grown wild. The paint has begun to peel from the window frames. And my heart, well, it has lived somewhere between the past and the present, unsure which direction is safe to belong to. I fill my days with predictable silence. Mornings start with oatmeal and weak tea. Midday is spent by the window with a blanket, knitting half-hearted scarves I never finish. Evenings, I sit in my recliner and reread the same 3 books over and over. I rarely step beyond the gate of my yard unless the mailbox is full. That all changed on the afternoon I received a letter from my niece, Clara. Clara is my sister's daughter, a bright woman of 30 who had moved to New York and, as far as I knew, had made a career in art restoration. The envelope was light beige with bold lettering. Inside was a small note. Dear Aunt Evelyn, I'd love to visit. I'll be in Oregon next week for a conference. Can I stop by? I hadn't seen Clara since she was 17. The idea of someone stepping into my dusty home, of seeing the faded rug, the untended garden, it sent me into a quiet panic. But I didn't say no. A week later she arrived. Clara stood on the porch in a raincoat, her curly hair wild from the wind, eyes beaming with warmth I didn't expect. I opened the door in a daze, still unsure why I'd said yes. You haven't changed at all, she smiled. Oh, I've changed, I whispered, my voice cracking with rust. She hugged me. Just like that, the world inside my chest shifted. The first few hours passed with hesitation. I watched her eyes scan the room, the dusty mantel, the old pictures. She asked questions carefully. About Richard, about my hobbies, about whether I ever saw friends. I couldn't remember the last real conversation I'd had with anyone. The mailman waved. The grocery clerk nodded. But connection. It felt like a language I had once known but forgotten. Later that evening, she asked if we could take a walk. The sky had turned soft lavender. I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and followed her toward the edge of the cliffs nearby. We walked in silence for a while. I used to come here with your uncle, I murmured, pointing toward a weathered bench. She smiled. You still come here? Not since he passed. Clara didn't push. She sat with me. We watched the waves together. That's when she reached into her bag and pulled out a small journal. She handed it to me. It's blank, I said. It's yours. For whatever you want to write. Or sketch. Or remember. I stared at the pages. They looked like open arms. That night, long after she had gone to bed in the guest room, I sat by the kitchen table with the journal open. I didn't know what to write at first, but my hand moved anyway. I wrote about the day Richard built the front porch steps with his bare hands. I wrote about the smell of lilacs in May. I wrote about how scared I felt each morning waking up to the same silence. And when the sun rose, the journal wasn't blank anymore. The next few days were a blur of unexpected joy. Clara and I baked together, the scent of cinnamon filling corners of the house that hadn't felt warm in years. We pulled weeds from the garden until our hands were stained green. We drove into town, and I introduced her to the bookstore owner, a widow named Darlene, who insisted on giving us tea. Clara reminded me how to laugh without worrying who heard. She reminded me that healing didn't have to be loud or fast. Sometimes it came in the form of an ordinary day spent differently. Before she left, we stood in front of the mirror in the hallway. I hadn't looked at my reflection in that frame for years. My gray hair fell over my shoulders in soft waves. My eyes had more softness than I remembered. You're beautiful, Clara said behind me. Smiled. I'm learning to believe that again. When she drove away that morning, I stood in the driveway until the dust settled. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse back into my chair. Instead, I opened the gate and walked down the lane toward the cliffs, by myself. I sat on that bench, opened the journal, and began to write again. Weeks passed. Then months. Seasons changed. I joined the local art group in town. I started baking for the church social every Sunday. I hosted a garden afternoon for the ladies on my street. I even redecorated the guest room. Not for Clara. For anyone. For possibility. For the woman I used to be. And the one I was becoming again. This is what healing looks like. Not a grand declaration, not a spotlight. But a slow rediscovery of voice, of movement, of memory. Started with a knock on the door. But really, it started with choosing to open it.